All right. Hello and welcome, everybody, to the 60th Annual ASD Convention. Today's presenter is Tom Silliman. He's going to be talking to us today about nurturing your personal journey, combining many varied life experiences and how that speaks to one's personal spiritual journey. So this is going to be a very interesting presentation. So just some housekeeping to do in the beginning. Tom's going to talk for a while, and then at some point in the presentation, we'll open it up to question and answers, and it depends on, so you can either use the hand raising thing on the top where you can raise your hand, or something else we can possibly do is just handle questions through the chat. So if during the presentation you have a specific question that you don't want to interrupt Tom for, please put it in the chat, and I'll be monitoring the chat to make sure that and highlighting those particular questions so that way Tom can get to them at the end. Okay. So without further ado, here we go. Tom, take it away.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, so just a quick intro before I do my intro. This presentation and this year, I've been now coming to the convention since 2012, and I wanted to take an opportunity to give back in a different way. I feel like I've been coming and kind of like taking a lot home with me. And really learning a lot. And this was an opportunity for me to share some of what I've learned and some of my own journey, and give people some tools and some ideas on ways that you can nurture your own journey. And that nurture comes through recording and doing retrospectives on those recorded aspects. So with that quick intro, we're just going to dive right in. What to expect from my presentation. So going to go over a little bit about who I am and what our goals are to accomplish during this presentation. I'll go a little bit over my timeline. In other words, what was happening in my life at different periods. This is a kind of a fun year for me. I'm going to be 44 in 2020, so I thought that was fun. So really, like taking an opportunity. This presentation was a driving force for me to create a timeline for myself and review what's been happening in my life. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that I use and ways in which we can think of recording things in a fashion so that it best is adapted to us. And I'll tell some stories along the way. I have some specific slides with specific stories, and I'll fill in some things on my timeline as we're going forward. Modus operandi. This is, well, all of these different tools and things that I've learned. How do I integrate those into my life, and what are the simple catchphrases I use to kind of describe those things, to give an example of like what my life is lived like at this point. And finally, we'll do a quick question and answer at the end. If for some reason we don't have a ton of time in there, I'll have my email address in the final slide, so that you have an opportunity to send me an email, ask further questions, or share as you may. So let's dive into a little bit more of the meat of things. So who am I? I kind of consider myself a little boring in some ways. It's like this, I'm a white, middle-class American, straight male. And, I call myself American in terms of like not being like, oh, I'm super proud, but literally, when I trace my roots back, I go back to the 1600s in suburban Connecticut. So majority of my family is all still in Connecticut. There's only 2 people who have ever gotten out. I have an uncle in upstate New York, and myself in Massachusetts, just over the border. So I have a very large family, and I grew up with that as a kind of a model for things. So it's really hard to say, is it the family, or is it the roots, or what is it that keeps everybody clinging to that space? But nevertheless, it's kind of, not a super exciting description of things. Went to college, got my bachelor's in science and electrical engineering at Northeastern University. Don't worry, I don't consider myself an engineer. But nevertheless, it was a good time in my life. I learned a lot, and it really fostered my what I call the troubleshooting side of myself. I currently work for IBM as a support engineer, mainly because I enjoy really working with people and customers and doing technical troubleshooting. So that really kind of paired up quite perfectly. It's a little more interesting. I'm a ballroom dancer. When I was at Northeastern University, I did social and competitive ballroom dance. So it's really kind of been a thread throughout my life since that. I've got plenty of stories about it, but ultimately that being a ballroom dancer has given me a lot of interesting opportunities along the way, and I'll talk about those as I go through some of my timeline. I'm a homesteader. Again, it's not in the traditional sense. I'm not living out west and doing out in the prairie or something. But I did have an opportunity to do some farming for 3 or 4 years. I bailed out of IT and went and worked on my own farm, and it was really an excellent time period and gave me a reset and kind of gave me perspective on what the computer world had been doing to my life. And I feel like now, post that, I live a much more balanced life. So being a homesteader is kind of like making sure that I'm outside, I'm working on my land and doing things out there to really foster who I am and keep my own mental and emotional health up. Another fun fact is I'm married with 4 kids. I know probably a lot of you have met them. There's a couple of years when my wife was in grad school that I brought the kids with me up at Lyndonville. So they were, wreaking havoc, running around, having a good old time. So a lot of people met them then, and I've had individuals of the group come with me just to hang out and have like a weekend away with me, which was pretty fun as well. So, and just to prove it to you, here's a picture of the family from this year. 3 girls and a boy, and specifically the fun part here is my 18-year-old just moved out. She's a seamstress. That's a dress she sewed herself, so it's kind of a fun. That's her homeschooling graduation picture. So anyway, just a quick share there. Anyway, so that's some fun facts about who I am. Overall, I just think of myself as normal in a lot of ways. So, goals of this presentation. We are going to talk about recording your life and experiences that you have. What mediums do you prefer for recording things? I use that a little tongue-in-cheek, of course. Find effective tools for journaling in your life. Share some of my journey through the timeline and the tools I use and why I've kind of settled on those, because I've used different things over the years, but this is kind of where I'm at right now. Staying humble and grounded. We're all human. I'll repeat this a couple times about staying grounded and being human. This is going on a metaphysical journey and recording things and rereading and reliving experiences is really super important to help us stay grounded and understand that that this is kind of I said I was normal. Well, this is my new normal, and just being patient with the process as we learn ourselves. Learning to respect all experiences. Some of them, when we're trying to witness them with our current framework, they may seem scary or really unknown and super challenging to our understanding of reality. But there's ways in which we can respect those and record them to kind of take away the reactions and get better perspective on them. I always joke about the elevator door fingers, something's going on that's just it's really intense and it's just really challenging me as the doors are closing. I don't ever like to let it go, kind of stick a finger in the door and kind of peek through that crack to still witness it and still be able to record it and have it as part of my history, but really take the opportunity to not lose out on that opportunity. And I think that theory, though it's a kind of silly theory, does help me get through situations which are really challenging without totally shutting them down. laugh at yourself. Ooh, this is a big one. There's times where things happen where I remember when I was first around people who were energy workers, and I saw them moving or twitching, and I was like, oh, there's no way. That's just super strange. No way I'm ever gonna do it. And then one time, somewhere down the road, I have this like huge amount of energy like moving through my body. I can just feel my whole self like starting to like undulate with the energy, and I just started laughing because I'm like, oh, here it goes. Like, I'm gonna be the person who's now moving and twitching with the energy. I'm going for this ride. And I just started laughing because I feel like the universe always has some little tricks in its bag to make sure to keep us humble and knock us down and help us remember that we're all human. So let's dive into my timeline. I love talking about all the things that have happened to me. I'm going to try to keep it reasonably brief and kind of go through things. We are talking about the early days now. So going back to elementary school, riding on the bus with somebody and having them read ghost stories, I just remember them really resonating with me in a way that like they felt like they were real. And I wasn't reading them like, oh, those silly ghost stories. I was like, no, these were real experiences. I have church in Bold. I was a Protestant congregationalist growing up, and basically went all the way up, joined the church, was very active in the youth groups and all these things. But when I look back on all the things that happened there, including like the reasons I separated from church and maybe even religion, I think would be a good way to say it. It had particular moments that really stuck out. And one in particular was I remember being on a church retreat and talking to a younger person than myself, only by a few years. And that person had a lot of questions. And I just had this moment where I remember the feeling of information flowing through me that didn't feel like my information, almost like I was like channeling that information and it was flowing. I was able to witness it coming through, and just afterwards just feeling like totally mind blown. At the time, my framework, the way I understood things was like this was Jesus talking through me, giving me this information to share with this young person. And later, I come to understand that like this is probably has a lot of different words, like, channeling, intuition, maybe it's a guide helping work through and talk through things. That overall was a very like valuable experience, and it was one that I noted but didn't really pay attention to until I started having the opportunity to do more intuitive flow, let's say. I heard about Edgar Casey. Yeah, washer repair guy came by and he mentioned it was, talking to me about Edgar Casey. I didn't know a lot, but it was like that seed that got planted about this person, and later on came back to visit me in a whole bunch of other different ways. Journaling, writing things as a kid, I remember going back and reviewing and seeing this like alternate voice creep out. It was super, super interesting. But without records, you wouldn't have that. So very important. This solar plexus resonance is a complicated way of just feeling like a really good feeling. Like really good feeling right in this like core part of myself, that whenever something was happening that was that felt like was right or a good choice, like it resonated in a way, and I would follow that feeling and found it to be always turning out in a really good and positive way. And that reinforced it and allowed me to kind of foster that as I went through life. And later on, I realized it'd been happening for so long. And then, of course, I moved to Virginia, which started a whole new era of my life. Pre-2008, I had three of my girls were born, three of the four kids, which were the girls. The boy was born a little later. I got into flower essences through Michelle Smallwright's Paralandra. And mainly it was happening because my mother-in-law had metastatic breast cancer, and she was using flower essences as one of her treatments to kind of help stabilize and balance. And so we spent a lot of time around flower essences and learning to muscle test for ourselves. So that was kind of like the basis for understanding kinesiology, and it came to be used a whole lot in my life as I move forward. Manifesting as a concept. I had a friend in Arizona who talked about it, and my wife and I started Actually, technically, we were, girlfriend or fiance at the time. We started, being in challenging times, financially or out of a job or, looking for a place to live. And we took an opportunity to kind of sit down, establish goals, and both work on manifesting these. And it was amazing the things that happened. And, at the time, I kind of just thought, I was like, oh, that's just the way it works. I didn't think a lot about it. But now I understand like how powerful it was and what a good learning experience it was. In 2008, I left corporate America. I was burned out. I had gotten run through the ringer, no appreciation. Company was ready to get rid of me. I was ready to get rid of them. So I walked and moved out to a farm that my mother-in-law had. But again, because she was sick, she couldn't upkeep it herself. So I took the time to go out and, as a family, went out and spent I think it was almost 7 years there. And during that time, I did some farming on the land, and my wife opened a dance studio. It was a huge, huge, important time that I was spending with my family, like every day, being out in nature every single day, no matter how the weather was, 2 feet of snow to, 95 degrees with 1,000% humidity, like all of those things were just beautiful and really taught me a lot. In 2009, I experienced the death of my mother-in-law. It was about as good as a death could be. She did have metastatic breast cancer. We got full 2 years with her, but we knew that things were headed towards an end, so she was able to plan her death, and we were able to kind of be with her on that journey, and it was really, really quite beautiful. I read a book called Michelle Small-Wright, Dancing the Shadows of the Moon. This is when I learned about integration and learning new concepts and kind of like having a almost have to like deconstruct some of your framework to integrate new pieces because there's not a place for that. So it's like we have this framework in which we work from, and reading this book just like really was like breaking pieces off of it and making it such that by the end of the book, I was sick for like 2 weeks just trying to recover. And it wasn't like I had an illness. I just felt horrible because I had basically like pulled parts of my life apart and my understanding of what reality was, and I was then reassembling it. So those experiences are important to differentiate of like being sick versus like going through integration periods where sometimes you just get knocked down and it takes time for you to kind of rebuild yourself. So and finally, like the birth of my son, and he comes in a lot of interesting ways. I won't get through all of them, but definitely introduce a couple. 2010, the ballroom dancing comes back around. It's been a while since I had been able to ballroom dance, and my wife had opened a dance studio, so I thought, why not teach a social dance class? The farming was taking a lot of my time, but this was something I loved to do, so I started this dance class. And I ebbed and flowed through 20 people in a class down to kind of a core group of 5 or 6 people, but those 5 or 6 people turned out to be also a group of metaphysical people who were very interested in like meeting and doing meditation and other readings and stuff like that. So fascinating how starting something like ballroom dancing class can deliver itself in some really important ways. The Monroe Institute, some of those people were associated with the Monroe Institute, which is, I don't know if I can even describe it really that well. It's a group in Virginia based on Bob Monroe's research. Really fascinating stuff going on there. But more importantly, the people that were associated with that had some really nice structure for helping kind of establish a class. So we created a little group that met at the same place as my ballroom dance class, and we did meditations and group discussions and things like that. School of Metaphysics was, I knew a ballet dancer, professional ballet dancer, who was really into metaphysics and was attending remote classes to the School of Metaphysics in Louisville, Kentucky. Definitely not my style of going and diving in like that. I really love learning from life and learning from my own experiences versus trying to dive in and like really like study it like I've done other things in my life. But I had an opportunity to sit in a room and do or go through listening to other people do past life crossings, regressions, and intuitive health analyses. And it was really, really eye-opening to hear kind of the breadth and depth of what is out there in terms of people's lives. Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating. Along this time through the Monroe Institute, I ended up with some tapes, yes, actual cassette tapes, that was doing past life regressions. And this is important because I had a very distinct memory where I remember doing the regression tape, lying in bed, feeling my physical body, but yet having visceral experience and like a physical feeling of remembrance and imagery in my head of a past life. And that's when I started to understand, like, oh, this thing about the Akashic records, this like history of all time, it's real, and it's like it is detailed. It's not just like, hey, I wrote down that this event happened. It's like every aspect of that thing happening is recorded and able to be accessed. So it's just absolutely fascinating. And then finally, you know, kids teach you a lot. Well, I had Wiley had a febrile seizure, which is, you know, when your temperature spikes up or down. With kids, it can happen when they're under the age of 1 without really having any repercussions. He was having these seizures, probably, you know, 3 or 4 over a couple-day period. But it was so scary that it was a moment that it actually, like, my conscious self flipped away, and I was only dealing with intuition. Like I felt like I couldn't think, but I knew exactly what needed to happen, and I used energy work to help calm the seizures as after the first one, calm them so that they didn't you know, peak the way that they had been, because the first one was super scary. So ways in which your kids teach you things, not always the best, but nevertheless a teaching moment. 2011, I had a horrific car accident. I'll just have a couple pictures of that and talk a little bit about it later. But it was an amazing moment that I walked away from and learned quite a bit from, as a matter of fact. We moved to Massachusetts. We finally, you know, things were changing in Virginia, and we took an opportunity for my wife to go to grad school, and we moved back up to be closer to family at this time in our lives. And then finally, when I got there, I took a Reiki class, which is interesting because I've been doing energy work prior, just through intuition. And taking a Reiki class was interesting because it had really distinct structures, but I felt myself not really like resonating with that type of energy work. And I realized, like, oh, it's important to like learn things, and then, like a good book, take the pieces that are valuable to you and let those be integrated. Okay, so 2012, it begins. I was doing flower essences for one of my wife's grad friends, and they had a pendulum with them, and they're like, oh, I use this pendulum. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And, you know, it was, you know, kind of a short, quick conversation, but I was like, well, I'm going to look up what pendulums are. And all of a sudden, here I am on the ASD website and researching things. And I, at that point, you know, went to the beginner workshop. At that point, I didn't really have any money, but they were able to offer a scholarship, which worked out excellent. That's when I met a whole bunch of people, and, you know, really opened up a new world to me. So that's the beginning of that piece. Medical intuitive. This was, you know, December 12th, or what is it? Solstice of 2012. There's a gentleman who was a therapist who worked with medical intuitives, and he, you know, offered up an opportunity to do screenings for people to see whether, you know, you had a knack for being a medical intuitive. Well, it turns out that I did, and I ended up working with him for probably, I don't know, better part of, you know, 6 months or so. And it was something that I learned an immense amount of things that basically how past lives can affect our lives currently. Also how there are negative energies out there, or shall we say, energies that are non-beneficial that we can work with. And some of them really, really are not good for you. I saw some really like ugly and horrible things happening to people through their current state and how they were resonating with these energies. So it really opened my eyes to like how careful we need to be in the world when we are out walking around. In that, like, the more open you allow yourself to be, the more you can welcome things in, and just being cautious when we do such things. Anyway, so, but again, he had his main medical intuitive come back from a period of hiatus, and I was pretty well done at that point. So so I moved on, but it was great learning experience. 2013, I came to my first full convention, And man, it was it was amazing. Just really an opportunity to explore myself away from my whole like actual life of work and family, and really made a big difference in how I interacted with my own personal journey as I went forward. I was introduced to what I call the spec, or my infinitesimal self, being past, present, future, kind of like it encompasses like so much I can't even describe it, but it was the concept first introduced to me at that point. The cloak, I'll stop and tell a quick story about this. This was the moment where, through some of my other experiences, when I was sitting in a class, and this day I can't remember what class it was. I remember very distinctly sitting there and suddenly feeling like my ears were not ringing, but kind of going quiet, and things kind of dulled around me. And I starting to feel like sick, like I was getting like a buildup of energy. And for me, it's in my stomach. So if I don't deal with that energy in my stomach, oftentimes I start to feel nauseous, and that's what was happening. So I'm trying to move that energy through my body and spread it around, and it's just not working. So I realized like I need to leave, get out of here. I go outside and I lay down in the grass, and the energy disperses and I feel much better. Okay, great. So now I go back into class, got some water, settle back into class, not more than 30 seconds. And this is, I think they were talking about herbalism or something. Nothing to do with any of this. And all of a sudden it's like everything went mute around me. And I'm sitting there like, can't really I'm like witnessing it, not necessarily seeing it, but I couldn't hear what was even being said around me and the participation of people in the class. But I had this sense that somebody came up behind me and put a big heavy cloak over my shoulders. I could feel the weight on my shoulders, and it was just so real. And then within a few moments, like everything cleared, and I was like sitting in the classroom again. And it was that moment where I was just like, I have no idea what is even happening, but I will remain calm. And I started writing down everything that was happening. And I have no idea what happened in that class or what class it was, but that experience was so visceral and real. It just was unbelievable to me that even happened. So anyway, just like really critical experiences, and being able to be open to some of these things was what the convention was really giving to me. I had a friend who was doing labyrinth work, and basically when she was meditating in her labyrinth, it said that she should reach out and talk to me. So she reached out and talked to me, and we started doing having these moments of, I would do readings and give her information from her labyrinth about how best to handle teaching classes that she was teaching on the labyrinth. And it's a really excellent opportunity. And did I think that I could be somebody channeling information about people's labyrinths? Like, no, I just was like, well, I'll try and see what happens. And that opportunity really like opened up kind of like what was possible, and also the power of the labyrinth to me. So now we get into, I did a reading for a friend at the convention in 2014. That's when I realized that there were things called entities. If you're not careful and you really are putting yourself in a vulnerable state, then things can kind of migrate and kind of attract to you. So I took on some entities from this person just by giving him a reading. We weren't physically touching, nothing happened, but that being open to that person in that very spiritual way, these things kind of migrated onto me. And I remember waking up in the morning, because this was a late at night thing happening. And I woke up in the morning, I felt horrible. I felt like I was going to be sick. And it was not the good energy sick. It was like just really bad. So one of my close friends is also kind of an intuitive person. So, and she was in Arizona. So at the time I had to wait a little bit, but I was able to call and talk to her, and she was able to do a clearing for me. And just because at that point I had no wits about me, I couldn't focus. So she was able to help clear these entities off. And then within, probably 3 to 5 hours, I was starting to feel normal again, and the sickness had kind of raised off of me. But it was a very important moment where I realized that we do have to kind of, be guarded, and when we start to open ourselves up and keep up certain types of protections. I was introduced to singing bowls at the convention, which have become a part of my life. I started establishing labyrinths whenever I would go. We go to Nickerson State Park on Cape Cod. There's a really beautiful spot by a lake, and I would go and establish a labyrinth of probably 15, 20 feet across on the beach. And I would go each morning and I would walk it. And I feel like it was such a beautiful opportunity to like to have meditative time. But I feel like just like subtle like discussions and things coming to me while I was doing this that just has really been important to me throughout my history. Transformational kinesiology, another really interesting way of using muscle testing to kind of get to people's root cause of an issue. Took a class on that. That was fun. Getting into 2015, I'll tell the story of the purple scepter, actually. That was, I was in a class, and it was a double class. It was the same class repeated twice, and I ended up sitting through the whole first class, not participating, even though it's a participatory class. I was letting myself be intuitively guided whether I should participate or not. And I kept saying, no, you should wait. And I was starting to get really impatient. We're like, why am I even here if you're not going to let me do this task? And I went through the whole first class. Finally, I got into the second class. And what happened was, I'm 3/4 of the way through the class. I'm starting to feel like this is nuts. I'm not sure why I'm even here if you're not going to let me do this. And then finally, there's a moment where somebody walked in to the center of the circle where they were doing this meditation. And when it popped into my head that as soon as that person leaves, you need to stand up as soon as they turn and then basically retrace their exit as my entrance. And so that's exactly what I did. And the funny thing is, at this point, the spec, the cloak, and this purple scepter, along with one of my guides, all showed up, and we're kind of like, "Hey, we're your A-team. We're here to like, be here and help you." And it was so, again, one of these very real experiences where I'm standing in the center of a room about 20 people in a circle. They're all staring at me in this kind of meditative center. And I'm having this huge experience. And I just wanted to stop and like, does everybody see this? But of course, nobody can. It's my experience. But it was just like monumental to see like how you could get these experiences that are just like, they're so real, but they're so very personal. Yeah, this was a fun one. This is the innocent energy integration was when I actually took all those aspects and brought them in, and they were integrated into me during an energy session with a friend. And that was the time where like they put their hands on me and they couldn't take their hands off. And I was like sweating with heat and energy that was pulsing through me. And this was when I could feel my body literally like undulating with energy, and started laughing at myself. So that was the moment in 2015, but huge monumental movements in my own personal journey. I have Camping Labyrinth again because this time I was working with a friend, and we made a labyrinth, and it was just beautiful. Here, I'll give you a quick show of that. So this labyrinth was one that we lit with votive candles at night, and when we were sitting in the circle, what looks like the two hands. We were sitting there with three families, parents and kids, and we all individually walked the labyrinth in the dark, and it took well over an hour. But somewhere towards the end of it, I had this feeling that there was people sitting around the outside of the circle, like ancestors sitting around the outside of the circle, and all just watching what we were doing. And I just was like, I mean, the hair stood up on my arms, and I was just like, I was kind of freaking out because of course nobody else sees this, and at least I thought. I turned to my friend, who is the one who I've worked with labyrinths on, and her eyes are like huge saucers. She was like, do you see, like worded to me, like, do you see this? And it was just fascinating to have an experience where somebody else witnessed it with you. So labyrinths have really come, though I'm not a labyrinth person, they definitely have been playing a pretty significant part in my life. The foundation for TMH. TMH is transmutational harmonics. I can't believe I'm even saying the words, but it's kind of like my what seems at this point, because I'm still early in the stages of this, but like my own special healing modality with some of the tools and the framework that I currently have. So it's kind of when that 2015 like really started to get the foundation to that piece. And no, I don't think it's a thing. I think it's just something that's slowly being delivered to me. Started working at IBM that year as well. When I was started with IBM, there's this thing which seems ironic to me, but about integrity and always doing the right thing. And to me, corporate telling me to always do the right thing seems like contrary in all my years of being in corporate. But that integrity piece really rang for me, and I started like finding ways in which I could live, just really live that integrity in my own personal life as well as in my work life. And it's been pretty fascinating to me as to just how much it's actually really changed how things have happened, and how like things from my childhood about ways you can kind of lie to yourself and get away with things that like I was no longer letting myself do. So it was a really important growth moment, and looking back at my childhood and what had happened. So 2016 question marks, 2017 question marks. What's that about? Well, I don't remember. I'm not a real big time and date kind of person in my head. That's why I keep journals. But when I was making this timeline, I couldn't find them, and I was like really super like, oh no, this is like so bad. I don't know where they are or what's going on. And what it came to me was, I was like, oh, that's okay. It shows how the journey goes, is that I did write and record things during those times, but it just shows that if you don't, you can have these huge gaps and you can forget things. So it's a good teaching moment that paying attention and writing things down is valuable to your overall timeline. This collage workshop in 2018, another, like, I would not have thought to be a metaphysical thing. This was actually, this workshop particularly was a person who used it for therapy. And they brought like thousands and thousands of images from all different places, you know, magazines and books and newspapers, and they just spread them all over the tables. And you got to go over and basically look at all these different images and like pick out the intuitive ones that that like you really wanted to have. That workshop was great because it gave me basically a way in which to live that year. Oh, actually, hold on. I finished talking about. So again, quick thing about a tattoo. So I was never gonna get a tattoo ever, but intuitively, this design popped into my head, told me I had to do it. I laughed again, and you know, here I am with a tattoo on my arm. But nevertheless, the journey is funny, and we have to keep ourselves well entertained. So remembering when you think you know something, don't get too cocky. Sometimes the journey has different places for you to be. All right, I'm getting a little lower on time, so I'm going to kind of speed up here, get through this timeline, and get into some of the tools here. 2019, I did Kenyan Safari, which was just absolutely amazing. 2020, well, as we can see, we're working on it in some really fascinating and interesting times. And the future, who knows? Waiting to find out, but being patient to get there. So, what works for you? Are you a handwritten person? You love to journal, you love to have your pen to paper. Do you like to talk? So speaking things is much more important for you. Are you a typist? I'm a touch typist. It's very easy for me to type because I can think things and they just kind of flow out my fingers. I love working with computers. I've worked on them my whole life. I have a mobile phone. I leverage that. So a lot of us have that in their life. Do we like to take photos, do drawings, paintings, what have you? Hold on a second here. The opportunity to experience different mediums, such as painting or dance and movement, they can't be discounted as ways to actually write down what we're going to be doing in our own personal journey, making sure we record things. So what worked for me? I use Microsoft OneNote. It has a lot of great things. Like I can write something and take a picture of it, and it will find that handwriting in the actual application when I'm doing searches. Day One electronic journal. It's a multi-device, you know, your computer, your iPad, your phone. It allows you to kind of be everywhere and always be able to write things down. As for the Handwritten journal, I always feel like this is still a really critical place to be when it comes to getting things down and having a very physical memory of it. And it helps when you're recalling things as well, or retracing, having retrospective on some of your history. iPhone or your smartphone and voice memoing, sketching and drawing, oftentimes a really easy way of getting things down on paper that are harder to represent in other fashions. These methods for me are always changing as I kind of move forward in my time. Anytime you can go back, sorry, if somebody asked about the cursor, that's me. Simplifying your life. In these electronic methods, you can do tagging, meaning it's easier to kind of like string things together by having common tags that describe what's been on. Writing in the columns of your journals and or transcribing voice memos can be really, really important. Why do we do this? Well, we want to review and go hunting for cookie crumbs about our overall path that we've had. I've been really surprised at the things I've found when I was doing this presentation and assembling my own timeline. This timeline allows you to kind of relive your experiences like you're going back and reading a really good book. That to me has been such an important piece of this whole thing. Let's see, I'm going to make a couple choices here, and to skip the rule of threes, I'm going to move on to this. I know this is now, it doesn't make so much sense, but the rule of threes is basically like, make sure you pay attention to your messages. If you don't listen by the third time, things can get a little rough. So this is my quick example of, that was my horrific car accident, gave me that little tiny red spot on my head. But here is what the car looked like. So you start thinking about, oh, I nearly died. There's barely any space in this car for me to live. It really gave me a moment to question what was happening in my life. And it was that really swift kick in the rear end of my car that launched me into more aspects of my own personal learning. Birth and death, I'm going to skip this for now, but it's really just talking about the energy of birth energy and death energy and how it had a pretty monumental effect on my life. The modus operandi. So I always try to listen to the resonance in my own self for my journey. I try to think of even the smallest quotidian choice. I love the word. Small, teeny, tiny, non-essential choices are important, so don't ignore them. Don't forget your elevator finger. Allow yourself to be challenged and pay attention and witness things that may be challenging to your current framework. Morphic resonance. As we learn, others learn with us. Look it up. It's a fascinating topic. Treat experiences like a good book. Really sit back and enjoy and witness the experience and see what you can get from that book and take away with you and integrate into your life. Be humble in your power and really make sure that you honor your journey and you're in control. So if you want it faster, ask for some extra movement. You want it to slow down, ask it to slow down a little bit. You need to make sure that you stay humble in your power and don't get power hungry. It can be very, very difficult and challenging in your life to hurdle forward without remaining humble and grounded. Ring pass not. This is just a concept which I'll go over sometime. You can ask me about it. It comes from Michelle Small Wright's books and her concepts. But really, to me, it's about honoring the times of integration in your life and watching how those can affect your framework and understanding of or your perception of reality. Pay attention to the rule of threes. The rule of threes is, if you can pay attention when you hear the message once, you're in good shape. But if you get beyond three, that the message gets louder, and that's not always in our best interest. Finally, be patient with your journey. Your journey is, it is yours. You can choose the speed at which you move forward, but honoring it and finding a really healthy way to engage with it is really, really important. I used a bunch of electronic tools, but I still love handwriting. I still love just going and sitting in nature and just witnessing without writing anything down, just having experience. So be patient with your journey, and that's it for now. So let's get into our final questions and answers. Feel free to post things in the chat, or we can allow you to talk if that'd be easier. Again, I'll do the best I can to give quick answers. I can be a little wordy, but I'll try to keep them short. If you have any observations or things that you'd like to share to me, including my email address here, so that you can feel free to email me and we can go forward from there. But that's what I have for today. Sorry, a little speedy at getting through things, but the idea I wanted to bring to you here was really nurture your journey through recording, being retrospective, and really like revel in it like a good book. It can be a lot of fun. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Just a quick question for you, Tom. Are you going? We have, since we're a little over on our time, we do have the lounge, which is room 2, where people can meet you there and talk to you if anyone wants to talk to you after the presentation. So you would just log out and go into room 2, and that room is moderated by somebody else, but you'll be able to do that. We do have one hand raised. She's had it raised for a while, so I will unmute her. So that this is Linda.
Linda. Yeah.
Okay, Linda, you had a question?
Oh, sorry. No, I don't. I've just been trying to. I've just been trying to get on the conference at all. So I realize I can't get it on with my computer because my computer is outdated for the application. So I was a little confused about, maybe you can answer this question. When I was listening, it's Tom Stillman, right? Tom?
Yeah,
right?
Tom Silliman, yes.
Okay. And I couldn't see him. Oh, there you are. Okay. What happened?
I made myself big now.
Can...
So what was happening was I actually set up so I had my presentation. So I did it like this, where I had my presentation, and if you, in the upper right-hand corner of the presentation, it should be a little image of myself. But then I just recently switched to just the image of myself. So so that may have been why it was confusing and you couldn't see me.
When the presentation,
I couldn't see you at all because I've done a lot of Zoom, and of course the person speaking or presenting, I can see their picture, but I could only see my picture. So it was really weird. I was like, okay. So are the conferences are video, right?
Yes. When someone has a presentation active, I'm believing that since you're on a mobile device, that you're not seeing as much detail as if you were on a computer. I think the computer, you're going to see a lot more detail than on a mobile device.
Right. But I didn't even see the option of how to get the video. That's what I guess I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish I did.
I get it. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm sorry. I heard part of your presentation, and I really loved your message about, recording your journey and connecting the dots. And particularly if you get the same message, listen the first time. I think that's really important.
Takes practice, but yes, it is very important for sure.
Okay. Now this is cool because I can see you now.
Yes.
So that's cool. Okay. Thank you very much for coming to the Dowsers and sharing all your rich experience.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. And William, thank you very much for moderating. And if there are any other questions, I guess I can slide over to the lounge, and if anybody wants to chat there, I'll be happy to talk then.
Okay, so and we just have a couple of thank yous, and Joan, and okay, excellent. So I guess that'll do it. Let's see. I just have to